Teachers of Reddit, when can you tell if a student is going through depression or self-loathing? If so, what do you try to do to help? In a year of substituting, the biggest thing I've learned is this: if a student doesn't seem right, they aren't. If you ever think to yourself, huh, that's a strange thing to say, that's not normal for that age group, it's because it isn't. My first week a 5th grade boy said to me, "You look like my stepdad. I'm a giant burly, bearded man, but you don't seem mean like him. Are you going to stick around?" My heart freaking broke. I excused myself and had the special ed aide look over my class while I went directly to the counselors. Good on you for telling the counselors. I hope it all worked out for that kid. I used to work in schools and I have to say that I always saw the kids I knew needed help as often as I could. They were the kids who didn't have supplies, didn't turn in work, had unreachable parents, were quiet, got bullied, etc. Essentially not thriving. Any change in behavior, usually personal hygiene, attendance, level of interaction. But honestly, as a once extremely suicidal grad student, it was surprising how little people noticed. I showed up for work for barely 4-5 hours, I was quite a bit withdrawn, but I also overcompensated. Sometimes I'd make an effort to dress nicely, be more cheerful because I didn't want anyone to see what was really going on. I'd hang around till almost midnight to make up for lost hours. Depressed behavior is often contradictory. There's no one way to predict. Some people withdraw. Some people throw themselves into things further in an effort to distract. You are seeing them for a few hours a day. It is hard to tell what's going in their life. That's why any change from baseline is important, doesn't matter which direction it moves in. For me, it didn't end well. I'm still alive and I suppose that's good. You're describing what I was like last year, after which I dropped out of graduate school. I wasn't suicidal, but I'm not suicidal was the best thing that I could say sometimes. I think one person may have noticed. It's always hard to know, so the best thing you can do is let them know you care. If you start with a casual one-on-one connection and make it known that you'd like to listen, you can sometimes save a life. You can tell by changes in attitudes, participation, and grades. These aren't the only indicators, but they are the ones I key off of for my students. All you can do is make yourself available. There are certain things we are required to report, but all of my students know that if they are having an issue, my door is open and confidential unless it is a mandatory reporting issue. I am upfront with them that there are some things I have to pass along because I don't want to betray their trust. When students do come to me with concerns, I let them talk. A lot of the time, there isn't much I can actually do, other than be a sounding board for them. I'll make suggestions after they are done if I think they would benefit from speaking to a counselor or give advice if they want it. I always ask for non-reporting issues if they would like me to inform their other teachers so they know what is going on. And if they say no, it stops with me. If they say yes, it is usually because they are not comfortable bringing it up themselves. Even if students don't say anything, as a group we let each other know if we notice something is off. Because if they don't talk to me, they might talk to another teacher. Some kids get really good grades and are really well behaved so as not to draw attention to themselves. I was like that. I needed help but didn't want it. I was so quiet that made me stand out. But all the adults ignored me because my grades were fine. Not a teacher, but I was a student going through this. I was in a small town with virtually no mental health resources. I was lucky enough to have a few teachers see what I was going through and cut me a bit of slack after watching me go through DHR battles with heavy abuse at home. I went from being a model student with straight A's to someone who showed up when I wanted with no work to turn in. One teacher in particular started inviting me to dinner, and she requested me as her student aide during my free periods. She would ask me how my home life was, and if things were bad she'd plan sleepovers with her daughter who I'd become close friends with. She made me feel like I was welcome in at least one spot in my life. She and her daughter made me feel loved when I wasn't at home. She probably saved my life in high school. Thanks Mrs. G. Thank you Mrs. Capital G. I've been teaching high school for 13 years. In that time, we've lost about a student a year on average, and about half of those have been suicides. After one particularly impactful student's passing, I made it my personal mission to form a personal connection with every one of my students. You can tell a student is going through depression or self-loathing the same way you're able to tell when a friend of yours is going through those same feelings. Students are people, after all. Oftentimes, attendance drops, attention to self-care tapers off, and they start to withdraw. They'll stop raising their hand and doing their assignments and sleep through class more and more. When that happens, I try to pull kids aside and say, "Hey, I've noticed that you seem like you're going through something. You're not alone. I'm here for you and I care about you." Some kids will deny anything is going on. Some will burst into tears and reach out for a hug. Some will set an appointment to come in and talk later. I also let them know about the support groups we have on campus and ask if they're interested. Sometimes I call home. Sometimes I don't. I feel out the situation and decide from there. I'll also try to put that student in a group with my more mature students. Not the overly positive ones, but the most level-headed, just so that there's some consistency in their life. Most importantly, I try to say every single one of my students' names every day in a positive way. I want to talk to every single kid every single period. Even if it's just a "Hey, I love your new shoes." I pay special attention to the kids I know are going through something. It's a delicate balance. I want them to know that I am paying special attention to them, but I don't want everyone else to know that I'm doing anything different. So acknowledging all kids this way allows me to spend just a minute or two longer with the ones who really need it without them getting labeled as teachers' pets. This part of my job is by far the hardest. I wish I could unburden my kiddos. This will probably get buried, but I was actually dealing with this today. I have had a freshman, 14-15 years old, in my class all year that is super quiet and withdrawn most of the time, but occasionally will contribute the most insightful, well thought out, knowledgeable responses in class. He clearly understands the content, but spends 3/4 of the class sleeping or tuning out. Early on, I noticed that he was clearly bright but not engaging. So I continued to check in with him. He mostly stayed withdrawn, and when I asked him what was going on, he would just shrug. I reached out to home and received no response, and continued checking in with him one-on-one, getting the same shrug. This past week were parent-teacher conferences, and he came in by himself, which a lot of kids end up doing due to parent work schedules. We chatted again, and when I asked him how he was doing, he said, "Well, you remember what it was like to be 15, which was the most detailed response I had gotten from him. I told him I hadn't shared that I had gone through some pretty severe anxiety and depression and didn't receive help until my 20s, and that I wish I had reached out sooner. I then shared with him that we have counseling services on our campus and asked if he wanted me to make an appointment for him, and he said okay, which honestly feels like a huge victory. I try to get to know each of my kids, and the biggest way I do that is simply by asking them how they are doing each day. May simply respond with, "Fine," but occasionally they will offer something more vulnerable. I guess to really respond to your question, I look for what I know and remember, and I try to support them the best I can. Good job with that kid. That is a huge victory. It's often hard to tell, and even when we suspect something, it's hard to do anything that will actually help. This semester I see 126 different students over the course of a typical day. As much as I'd like to, it's simply not possible for me to get to know all of my students on anything close to a personal level. I can't be on the lookout for changes in students' behavior if I don't know what their normal behavior is. My school identifies certain students as being at risk, based on home life, grades, etc., and assigns each teacher 2 of those students to mentor. I try to check in regularly with my mentees, as well as any student who seems to be acting differently. Of course, depression doesn't just strike the type of person my school labels at risk. Even if I notice that something seems off about a student, quiet when they are usually loud, loud when they are usually quiet, avoiding usual friends, unusual amount of missing work, etc., there isn't always much I can do. Depressed people don't want others to know they are depressed. My typical strategy is to quietly pull the student aside and just ask how they are doing. I've gotten everything from "great, no problems here" to "my stepdad called me a worthless piece of crap this morning, and my ex-girlfriend is pregnant but she isn't sure if it's mine." and I'm failing 4 classes, so I'm afraid I won't graduate. And I think you're about to send me to the principal because I have chewing tobacco in my mouth. If nothing else, I try to be a listening ear. Many of my students don't really have that. The counselors at my school are actually pretty good at helping struggling kids, so if someone needs to talk but doesn't want to talk to me, I put them in touch with their counselor. If a student says they are fine, but I think they might be struggling with depression or something related, I'll reach out to their other teachers, their coaches, and the school counselor to relay my concerns. We'll keep a close eye on the student, but we can't do much else without anything concrete. I've reached out to parents before if I have serious concerns. I'm not a teacher, but I work with and in schools. I know teachers that have cried in the car on the way home because they know their students are suffering with depression and that low self-esteem is eating them alive. Yes, a lot of the time it is very easy to tell if a student is depressed. Kids, even older teens, aren't as good at being mysterious and closed off as they imagine. Most of them are absolutely desperate for adult attention and validation. A big problem is that a lot of the answers aren't appealing or cool. Getting them resources sometimes helps, but that might mean pointing out the issue and or talking to CPS or their parents about what's going on. Most kids just want teachers to back off, and that's just not possible most of the time. But they can be a little generous with grading. They can offer extra time, or just an acknowledgement that things suck right now. They can urge teens to do something they hate, staying off social media, which tends to help. It's hard because teachers have so many responsibilities, and being a mental health worker isn't something they're often equipped to do. But they can provide unconditional positive regard and support students, even in small ways. They can be kind. They can take those small moments to make students feel acknowledged and cared for. So many teachers are out there working on solutions, trying to get more counselors at schools. Right now, most high schools have literally hundreds and hundreds of students per counselor, but because that type of stuff is expensive, it's really hard. Thank you. I've cried on many occasions this year because of my students and the struggles they go through. I do so much to help them the best I can, but I am also a human and I do need to give attention to the other 30 students in my classroom too. I've spent hours after school calling therapists for my kids, talking to administrations and researching ways to help, but dang. I don't know if this belongs here, but I'm going to put it here anyway because it's important in discussions like this. Depression does not mean quiet and reserved. It can mean a variety of symptoms. When I was dealing with depression, I became more outgoing and loud, cracking jokes and trying to get people to talk to me. And whenever someone shut me down, I took it harder than the average extrovert. I'm extremely introverted BTW. Saying look for the quiet kid isn't always helpful. I personally had a 2-year period of depression that wasn't characterized by isolation. While depression can certainly manifest as quietness, keeping that narrow-mindedness is hurting the people who are suffering but trying to keep a brave face. I'm not a teacher, but in my senior year of high school, I went through a very rough patch towards the end. I missed 80+ days of school and barely graduated. At the time I had a phenomenal creative writing teacher. She noticed the work I turned in, as well as my plummeting attendance to class, and when the final project was assigned, which I was not there for, she confronted my group and said to them, if Space Reindeer doesn't do her part, she's going to fail my class, which she needs to graduate. You all need to grow up and reach out a hand to your classmate in need. Each of my group members would individually text me to remind me to complete my project work on time. I know their grades were dependent on it too, but the support they gave me really helped lift me up and actually try to finish strong. I don't think I would have passed that class without them or without that teacher. You all need to grow up and reach out a hand to your classmate in need. That is often such a wishy-washy statement, but it's funny how kids interpret it the best way. A lot of wrong can happen, but it didn't. It's crazy how that small difference meant the world to you and that it is all that is ever needed. Not a lot of adults even realize that. We were talking about self-harm and suicide in class and this kid raises his arm and puts it down just as quickly. I call on him and he just kinda shrugged it off and said nothing is wrong. Later in the semester I had a conference with this kid's parents and the dad is ripping the kid for getting mostly A's and a B. I mean above the normal you can do better thing most parents do when they are disappointed. It still haunts me that I didn't get the kid to open up to me and ask what's truly wrong in his life. I think about it daily and feel like a horrible person for not doing more to help this student. Yet, my dad gets extremely angry whenever I get anything below 85%. He once started berating me in Hebrew in front of my teacher when he said he was impressed by my 80% on the test. The teacher just stood there doing nothing as he didn't understand what was going on. At the moment I can say what not to do. I very recently had a student with very serious and noticeable self-harm marks. This student had several suicide attempts last year, none at school. Thankfully the student is getting treatment, but that doesn't stop other students from isolating her. Even worse, the school admins from telling her she is contagious and should stay away from other students lest she give them bad ideas. She definitely needs more one-on-one help and encouragement, which I'm still figuring out how to do. That is horrible. You know, I don't really know what the teacher can do, but looking back I was seriously depressed for a couple years in high school. I just absolutely quit caring about my grades, didn't care if I got in trouble, etc. I'd sleep through class and eventually pretty much told my teachers that I didn't care and they should just quit giving me work. This was all handled as a discipline issue, but nobody ever really tried to figure out why. Like, I was never sent to a counselor. Nobody ever really engaged with my mom. It was just a bunch of detentions. Everything worked out, but I sorta wish somebody had sat me down and figured out I was depressed and told my mom so she'd get me into therapy to work out my crap. Not a teacher, but wanted to share the one time that one did notice when I was struggling and what they did to help. This was in college, where professors don't interact with students as much, so it's probably a lot harder for them to tell. Some classes are small and professors know how much students participate and what their typical performance level is, but sometimes it's a large lecture with TAs and very minimal interaction. A large part of it is just how well they know you before. As someone who doesn't know you can't be expected to realize something is off. I also worked for them. I was one of their RAs. Met with them regularly to discuss research, and even got to take their class. They knew me before, and recognized pretty quickly as the semester moved on. The most helpful things were that they waited to talk until a time where others wouldn't be able to overhear, and just listened. I also knew mental health of students was something they cared about, as they made that very clear throughout the time I've known them. Not just to me but to everyone in the lab and the class as well. So I felt like they really did care and want to help. They also showed me how to contact insurance providers to find someone who took the insurance I had, so that I could get help. My university's health center doesn't have the greatest mental health care if you need anything long term. They even have a session cap for students that does not reset at the end of the year. So finding a therapist was huge, as I had never had to find one before and didn't know how insurance really even worked in that regard. It might not be relevant for high school kids, but if you work with college students there's a good chance they are just not sure what to do to get themselves help. And reaching out to family can mean having to explain the situation. If you're a mandatory reporter, let them know too. Some students don't want to risk whatever consequences may come from that, but might still just want someone to talk to. If they're close to saying something you have to report, stop them and give them a chance to make it more general so you're not placed in that position but they can still talk. I wanted to be in control of how the situation was handled, and this let me do that while still getting to finally talk to someone. I eventually found a therapist and worked through my stuff, but the way the professor handled first approaching me made all the difference. Be understanding, respectful, and make yourself known as someone they can trust. Identifying it can be difficult, but making yourself a known support might mean all you have to do is ask if there's any suspicion, and hopefully the student will be comfortable sharing honestly instead of denying it. Thank you for caring enough to ask this question. Obligatory, not a teacher. I'm bipolar and had a rough home life. I spent almost a third of high school in mental health facilities. It seemed like I'd be in for a week or two, be okay for a week or two, spiral and go back in. My schoolwork was constantly disrupted because of the hospital stays, and even when I was home I had a really hard time getting myself to do the work. My school was small and had a packed spec ed program. The alternative high school was almost an hour from home, so I was basically told to suck it up, and my teachers were told to give me some lenience on deadlines. Even with those accommodations I wouldn't have graduated if it weren't for my senior year English teacher. She knew that my grades weren't bad because I was stupid or because I wasn't doing the reading. I'm a huge reader and she picked some pretty great books, but an issue of not having the mental energy to actually do the work. Normally I'd be able to get through my research and thesis but not be able to actually sit down to write the essay. So every time an essay was due she would allow me to present orally, in private, in the 30-minute gap between when school got out and when the buses left. Basically, we would talk about the book for 15 minutes, I would present my arguments for the assignment, give quotes straight from the book, tabs in my copy, ect. It was a huge thing for me. I was able to free up the time I spent stressing about not writing my English homework and actually do some of the math or chemistry. She saw that I was struggling and adapted her teaching style to me. I'll forever be grateful to you, Ms. B. There's no way I'd be where I am without you. First year of teaching. Student comes in, having a really rough day. We were talking about predestination through Calvinism. After class he asks me if God predetermined that his baby brother was supposed to die the previous night. Long story short, his mother was beaten by his stepfather and miscarried. Obviously I was shocked. I contacted the office and they said there was nothing they could do for him. So I spent 2 hours after school that day letting him vent and get it all off his chest. I simply couldn't let him go home for the weekend without talking to someone other than family. You just gotta look for the signs. Sometimes they are not clear, and sometimes the signs are blatant. I remember a teacher just asking me, "Hey Chiz, is there anything going on while on a field trip in a boat?" It felt like the pressure I had on me just left that instant. I finally had someone that really cared and listened to me. My art teacher stepped in when I was clearly suffering from male anorexia and sat me down, told me where I could find help and that there's no shame in boys seeking help for mental problems, and supported me throughout the whole process. Even with a hugely unsupportive family, I owe her so much, but sadly she retired and I never could go back to say thanks. Search her in the directory, contact the school and ask if they have a forwarding address. As a teacher myself, students don't realize how much a thank you can mean, even years down the line. I teach children in the younger age group, 4-6-year-olds. I get concerned when I see them suddenly withdraw themselves from their friends, lessons or favorite activities for long periods of time, not a one-day thing. Start having nightmares and wake up screaming, have sudden outbursts of anger, cry over things that usually doesn't bother them, not getting picked first or having to wait their turn, having no pride in their work, tears up their art pieces or work, or saying things like "I'm so stupid," lethargic, lying down during playtime or falling asleep at mealtime. These behaviors are worrying when they show up one day and continue for a period of time. That's when I ask the parents if there's any shift in family dynamics or if something happened recently. I would also talk to the children. Ask them how are they, what are they feeling, why are they feeling this way, or ask them how things are at home. Usually they'll tell you details that can give you a bigger picture. Daddy is sleeping on the couch, or mummy says that if I want to see daddy, I've to call an Uber myself. To help them emotionally, I give them more fun responsibilities so that they feel needed and wanted. Handing out gifts, consistently praise them when they show good behavior and thank them when do something for others. Increases self-esteem and it makes them feel appreciated. If there's time, I'll slot in a mini activity where everyone sits in a circle, passes a ball around while music plays, and when the music stops, the ball stops. Everyone will then say one good thing about the child with the ball. Basically musical chairs of compliments, haha. It helps them feel better about themselves, but if the root of the problems don't get better, there's nothing much we can do. We can feedback all we want to the parents, but sometimes they dismiss us or ask us to mind our own business. Your kid is our business. I had a 5-year-old tell me that daddy and mummy didn't love him and that he wanted to kill himself. It wrecked me. I had to report it to the principal and we asked the parents for permission for a counselor to come down to speak with the child. They're the reason why I'm applying for masters in psych. I couldn't do much for them with my early childhood diploma or my psych degree. Hopefully my next step can. You are a hero. Is this actually a normal thing? I don't even know if my teachers even knew what I sounded like. No one gave a frick about me. I skipped classes constantly, couple times for 2 weeks. never spoke to anyone, had a hat covering my whole face. There was clearly something wrong with me and no one ever in their life ever even batted an eye towards me. I was the only kid in every class to not say anything. Everyone had their friends, I had literally no one. I sat alone in a corner. As a teacher, this makes me sad. I wish you would have been in my class. Obligatory. I'm not a teacher, but I'm a high school student with a few things to say. First of all, don't beat yourself up if you can't notice the warning signs. It's hard to tell when you're doing a job that requires you focus on everybody and the subject matter, so you can't dedicate a lot of time towards one student. Also, you don't have a whole lot of time with your students, depending on your school. An hour every day can go by really fast. Sometimes, all you can do is just be there for your students. Let them know they can count on you to help. Be approachable and kind. If you're a good teacher, it shouldn't really interfere with your strictness. During school, I almost lost both of my parents. One of my English teachers knew about this and never bothered to approach me or ask if I was okay. Eventually, I broke down crying during one of my music classes, then ran outside to hide it. When I came back in, my music teacher asked if I was okay and I just nodded. He shook his head, hugged me, then said, "No, you're not okay." For the rest of the period, he allowed to hide in one of the practice rooms and cry my heart out, letting me know he was available if I ever needed anything. It's small, but it meant the world to me. If you notice something is wrong or if you know there's something going on, all you have to do is comfort them to make a difference. You don't have to wait until someone has a breakdown to tell your students you care about them. Make it known. Anyone else just not have a teacher that actually gives a crap? Not that am I depressed, but it seems like teachers just don't care or do crap when some kid is getting bullied or seems depressed during class. I'm a piano teacher, and I usually tend to have a deeper connection with all of my students. Music is all about feelings, and if I don't know how they feel, I'll never know how to teach them to play to their own unique style and develop their own sound on the piano. Usually, if one of my students is going through something, they'll be less attentive during the lesson. They might not show up some weeks. Interestingly enough, some of them practice less because of it, but some of them practice more. Sometimes I can also tell based off of what piece or pieces of music they're trying to learn, how they talk about the music, and how they see the music. My students usually aren't shy to tell me what's going on, and it's all these signs and more that make me ask in the first place. After a certain point, I became somewhat of a counselor myself, talking to them about their issues and being a friend, instead of just a piano teacher. If something is truly beyond me or I have a legitimate concern that something terrible might happen, I'll talk to a parent, if the student is still of that age of course, and let them know something is going on. I had a student once that was suicidal, and I consider it a victory for me that I was able to show him why to not do anything through music. He became absolutely enthralled in the idea of the piano as an outlet. He went on to go to music college and become a piano teacher performer himself, and I believe he's almost done with his degree at this point. Probably going to get married, but I thought I'd share anyways. Not a teacher myself, but just having a teacher who was open to chat meant so much to me. There was one that would check how I was going whenever I saw him, and just that really helped. Something I try to keep in mind is that everyone exhibits depression differently. Some can become quiet or withdrawn, or they can be the exact opposite. I have seen students start acting out or causing a scene because they are unwell and don't know how to express it, because it can be so different, and because teachers don't see students as much once they get to higher grades. When symptoms of depression usually start, it can take a while for people to notice. However, teachers can coordinate with one another and ask about students if they do start to worry. From there I will get the guidance counselors involved. I know this isn't a perfect solution, but they usually have the resources to get involved with families and find a way for the student to get the help they need. Having depression myself, I tried to make sure my students always knew it was okay to be open about it and reach out if they need help. I put up posters in the front of my room about depressions and this being a safe place. It can be hard to tell with a lot of students, but I found in my short time as a teacher that if you try and make your room feel like a place where they can be open as people, rather than just obedient homework machines, they will be much more open. You made my day. I find the unnecessary pluralification of words funny. Depressions. Thank you so much for this. I know it was a type, but this has actually made my day so much better that I'm nearly happy crying. I'd say most aren't able to tell at all. They're seeing so many students every day that it'd be hard to know individual personalities and notice if they change. I had depression and attempted suicide in my teens. I don't think my teachers had any idea. I never said anything to them or reach out to them, and they either didn't notice or just never said anything to me before or afterwards. I was depressed and self-harming and went inpatient for 10 days, and I told one of my 7 teachers and she was shocked. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.